Welcome to the quiet halls of eternity. Imagine for a moment the final resting place of warriors, not a battlefield scattered with broken shields, but a great hall where the doors never close, where the hearth fires burn forever, and where those who died in courage find the deepest, most lasting peace the Norse could conceive. Tonight we journey into Valhalla, the hall of the slain, where the dead do not sleep but rest in ways the living never could. I am your DrowZy storyteller, and this is the story of Valhalla, not as a place of endless war, but as the most profound sanctuary the Viking mind could imagine, where warriors earn not further battle but the ultimate gift, eternal perfect rest. High above Midgard, where the rainbow bridge meets the edge of forever, stands a hall so vast that its roof seems to touch the stars themselves. This is Valhalla, Val in the old tongue, the hall of the slain, the palace of those who died with weapons in their hands. But to see it only as a place of war is to miss its deeper truth. Valhalla is where the Norse stored their most sacred dreams of peace. The hall stretches beyond sight, its walls built from the spears of the honored dead, its roof thatched with shields that gleam gold in the eternal twilight. 640 doors pierce its walls, each one wide enough for 800 warriors to walk through side by side, yet tonight they stand open not for armies, but for the gentlest evening breeze that carries the scent of meadowsweet from Eidavurl, the plain of the gods. Inside, the light comes not from torches, but from the gleaming of weapons that will never again know blood. Swords hang like silver mirrors along the walls, reflecting not battle fury but the soft glow of contentment. The Aynherjar, the chosen slain, move through these halls with the unhurried grace of those who have all eternity before them and no urgency left to carry. Here is the first mystery of Valhalla. It was built not for war but for the aftermath of war, for that deep, bone-weary settling that comes when a warrior finally lays down his shield and knows the fighting is finished. The Aynherjar who earned their place here discovered something the living rarely understand, that true victory is not conquest, but the moment when conquest becomes unnecessary. In one corner of the vast hall, an old warrior from the Danish islands sits carving runes into a piece of ash wood, not because he must, but because the slow, careful work pleases him. His weathered hands move without trembling, guided by centuries of practice and the luxury of unlimited time. The runes spell out the name of a daughter he left behind, but there is no sadness in the carving, only the quiet satisfaction of keeping beloved things close through patient craft. Nearby, a shield maiden from the northern fjords tends a small garden she has grown in a wooden box. The soil came from the roots of Yggdrasil itself, dark and rich and alive with possibilities. She grows nothing practical, no food is needed here but night-blooming flowers that release their fragrance in waves as she waters them with dew collected from the branches of the world tree. The flowers bloom and fade and bloom again in cycles longer than mortal lifetimes, and she tends them with the same careful attention a living gardener gives to prize roses. At the far end of the hall, where the light grows soft and golden, two warriors play H-Nefertafel on a board carved from whale bone. The game has been going on for decades, each move considered for months, each strategy unfolding with the patience of glaciers. They are not competing so much as collaborating in the creation of something beautiful, a perfect game that exists for its own sake, with no stake beyond the pleasure of playing well. This is what the living missed about Valhalla. It was not an eternal battlefield, but an eternal Sabbath. The Aynherjar had earned the right to rest not just from labor, but from the desperate urgency that drives the living. Here, in the place reserved for those who died courageously, courage itself became unnecessary. The hall held only those who had proven themselves worthy of perfect peace. Each dawn in Valhalla arrives not with the harsh clang of weapons, but with the soft chiming of wind through the hall's countless eaves. The Aynherjar rise not to battle, but to the gentlest waking the Norse imagination could conceive, the knowledge that another day stretches ahead with no duties except those chosen freely, no urgencies except the quiet pull of personal satisfaction. The morning ritual begins in the hall's great bathing pools, fed by springs that bubble up from the roots of Yggdrasil itself. The water holds the memory of rain that fell on 9 different worlds, and as the Aynherjar bathe, they feel the accumulated peace of every drop that ever nourished the world tree. The pools are carved from single blocks of white stone, their edges worn smooth by centuries of gentle use, and the Ayn move through the water like swimmers in a dream, unhurried, weightless, cleansed not just of dust, but of every burden they carried in life. After bathing, they dress not in mail and leather, but in robes of the finest cloth woven from the fleece of clouds. The fabric shifts color with their mood: deep blue for contemplation, silver for joy, soft green for the contentment that comes from tending growing things. No two robes are alike, for each Ayn's piece takes its own particular form, and Valhalla honors every variety of rest. The morning meal comes not from Sehrimnir, the boar slaughtered and restored each day, but from fruits that grow in the hall's own orchards. Trees heavy with golden apples stretch their branches through windows that look out onto Gladsheim, and the Ayn pluck the fruit with the lazy satisfaction of those who need never count supplies or ration pleasure. The apples taste of every good meal they ever shared in life, concentrated and perfected and freed from the anxiety of scarcity. In the orchards themselves, some Ayn spend their mornings in gentle labor, not the back-breaking toil of survival, but the meditative work of tending. They prune with silver shears, their movements flowing like dancers, each cut considered and perfect. The trees respond to this careful attention by growing in patterns too beautiful for the living world, spirals and arches and living bridges that exist for no purpose, except to please the eye and provide shade for afternoon rest. Others choose the morning for remembering. In Valhalla's great library, a wing of the hall where memory takes physical form, they tend the stories of their mortal lives, preserved not as boasts or regrets, but as treasures polished smooth by time and distance. The books write themselves, filling with the adventures and loves and quiet moments that made each life unique, and the Ayn read them like poetry, finding beauty in experiences they were too busy to appreciate while living. Still others spend the morning in what the living would call conversation, but which in Valhalla becomes something richer, a sharing of perspectives accumulated over centuries of observation. They speak of the patterns they've noticed in bird flight, of the way light falls differently in each season, of small kindnesses they witnessed among mortals. Their talk has the quality of prayer without petition, simply the joy of noticing beauty and having eternity to appreciate it fully. By midday, a deep quiet settles over the hall. This is the time of perfect rest, when even the Ayn's gentle activities fade into simple being. They lie on couches carved from living wood, still growing and putting forth leaves, and they rest in the way only the truly secure can rest, without vigilance, without plans, without the need to remain partially alert for danger that will never come. The afternoon light in Valhalla has a quality unknown in Midgard, golden and thick like honey, moving slowly through the air as if time itself has learned patience. In this light, the Ayn pursue whatever brings them joy. Some play harps strung with silver wire, their melodies drifting through the hall like incense. Others work with their hands, crafting objects of perfect beauty that need serve no purpose beyond existing. Still others simply walk the endless corridors, savoring the luxury of movement without destination. In the vast armory of Valhalla, weapons hang in ranks that stretch beyond sight, but these are not tools of war, they are monuments to war's ending. Each sword, each spear, each shield carries the memory of its last battle, the moment when its wielder's courage earned them eternal rest. The weapons gleam not with oil and whetstones, but with the patina of peace, their edges smooth as river stones, their purpose transformed from dealing death to celebrating the courage that transcended death. Gungnir hangs here, Odin's own spear, the weapon that never missed its mark. But in Valhalla's armory, Gungnir's point has been blunted with silver, its shaft wrapped in silk ribbons that flutter in the breeze from the hall's open doors. The spear that once split shields and mail now serves as a banner of completion, marking the place where all battles finally end. The Ayn who pass it run their fingers along its length not in preparation for war, but in gratitude for war's conclusion. Near Gungnir rests Gram, the sword that Sigurd used to slay Fafnir the dragon. The blade that once burned with the fire of vengeance now reflects only the gentle light of the hall's torches. Its crossguard has been inlaid with pearls from the streams of Niflheim, each one representing a tear shed for violence that need never be repeated. When the wind moves through the armory, Gram sings, not the harsh note of metal cutting air, but a lullaby that speaks of courage rewarded with rest. The shields tell their own stories of transformed purpose. Svalin, the shield that stands before the sun to protect Midgard from burning, hangs here in smaller form, countless copies made by Aynheyjar who have learned its craft during their eternal leisure. These shields bear no battle scars, only intricate carvings that spiral inward like meditation labyrinths. The Aynheyjar trace these patterns with their fingers during evening prayers, following paths that lead not to victory over enemies, but to victory over the need for enemies at all. In one corner of the armory stands a workshop where the Aynheyjar practice weapon craft, but their forging serves memory, not war. They work metals that exist nowhere in Midgard's silver that holds moonlight, gold that remembers the warmth of the first sunrise, iron that carries the strength of mountains but none of their hardness. The hammers ring against anvils with the rhythm of lullabies, each strike measured and musical, shaping not tools for killing but art pieces that celebrate the skill required for true protection. Here a warrior from the Orkney Islands works a spear point from star metal, not to pierce armor but to catch and hold the light of distant constellations. Her hammer falls in time with her breathing, each blow releasing sparks that drift upward like prayers. The spear she crafts will never draw blood, but will stand in the hall's great windows to gather starlight for the winter evenings when even eternity feels long. Beside her, a Danish axeman carves the handle of a warhammer from the heartwood of Yggdrasil itself. The wood is alive with wisdom accumulated over ages, and as he works, the hammer's head, forged from the last iron sword he carried in life, transforms into something resembling a flower more than a weapon. The tool's weight remains the same, its balance perfect for the work he once knew, but its purpose has become purely ceremonial, a symbol of strength applied to creation rather than destruction. The most profound weapons in Valhalla's armory are those that were never used in anger, the swords of kings who chose diplomacy, the axes of jarls who found ways to share rather than raid, the spears of warriors who learned to threaten only in defense of those too weak to defend themselves. These weapons shine brightest of all, their virtue magnified by restraint, their power perfected through the choice not to use it except when absolutely necessary. At the armory's center stands an empty rack, its arms outstretched like a scarecrow's. This is where Odin will someday hang his own sword, when Ragnarok comes and goes and the need for war passes away forever. The Aynheyjar maintain this empty space with special care, polishing its wooden arms, keeping its brass fittings bright, preparing the place where the last weapon in all the 9 worlds will finally come to rest. Through the golden halls of Valhalla move the Valkyries, but here their role has transformed as completely as the weapons in the armory. No longer choosers of the slain, they have become servants of the deepest rest, ministers to those who have earned the right to perfect peace. They move through the halls like evening breezes, their presence felt more often than seen, bringing comfort with the sure touch of those who understand both war and war's ending. Brunhild tends the hall's great hearths, but the fires she kindles burn without consuming, giving warmth and light with no need for fuel. Her hands, once steady on reins as she rode the wind above battlefields, now move with equal skill as she arranges kindling that renews itself, logs that burn forever without growing smaller. The flames dance to silent music only she can hear, and their light carries the memory of every campfire that ever gave comfort to warriors far from home. Her hearthcraft has become an art of memory and solace. She can kindle fires that burn blue for remembrance, silver for celebration, gold for the deep contentment that comes after long struggle. The Aynheyjar gather around her fires not for warmth, they need none, but for the hypnotic pleasure of watching flames that exist purely for beauty, with no purpose beyond the comfort they provide to eyes that have seen too much and now deserve to see only peace. In the hall's healing chambers, Sigrun tends wounds that exist no longer in flesh but persist in memory. Her touch can ease the phantom pain of old battle scars, can gentle the startling reflex that makes a warrior reach for weapons when thunder rolls across Asgard's sky. She works with silver threads finer than spider silk, stitching not skin but the torn places in warrior hearts, mending the invisible damage that combat leaves behind even in the souls of the victorious. Her needlework creates tapestries that tell the stories of courage without glorifying violence, weavings that show the moment of choice when a warrior stepped forward to protect others, the quiet aftermath when they sat alone with their decision, the slow healing that transforms necessary violence into wisdom. These tapestries hang throughout Valhalla's corridors, not as war banners but as prayers for peace, reminders that courage's highest purpose is to make courage unnecessary. Gurndal oversees the hall's vast libraries, but here the books do not record battles won and enemies defeated. Instead, they collect the gentler victories of mortal life, acts of unexpected kindness, moments of beauty noticed in the midst of darkness, the small daily choices that make someone worth fighting for. She guides Ayn Herjar scribes as they write these stories, helping them remember not their deaths but their lives, not their fiercest moments but their most tender ones. Under Gurndal's care, the library has grown to contain not just human stories, but the secret histories of everything worth protecting. Here are the biographies of dogs who waited faithfully for masters who never returned, of horses who carried wounded riders to safety at the cost of their own lives, of trees that sheltered fugitives and streams that provided drink to those too weak to travel further. Valhalla's library celebrates the entire web of loyalty and sacrifice that makes life worth preserving. Rijinleif tends the hall's gardens, but the plants she grows exist nowhere in Midgard. These are flowers that bloom from memory alone, the scent of a mother's herb garden, the color of sunset seen from a childhood home, the texture of grass beneath feet during the last peaceful morning before war began. She plants these remembrances in soil made from the dust of gratitude, waters them with tears of joy, tends them with the patience of one who knows that the most beautiful things grow slowly and in their own time. Her garden work has the quality of resurrection without violence. Under her care, every flower that ever brought comfort to a dying warrior blooms again in perfection, freed from frost and drought and the limitations of mortal seasons. The Ayn Herjar walk these paths not to pick flowers, but simply to remember that beauty exists, that they once fought to protect gardens like these, that their courage has earned them the right to tend rather than defend. In the evening, all the Valkyries gather in Valhalla's great chamber to sing the day closed. Their voices weave together like the wind through pine branches, carrying melodies that existed before the first battle and will survive the last. They sing not of glory in war but of the peace that makes war worthwhile, the quiet nights when families sleep safely, the harvests gathered under blue skies, the ordinary days when no one needs to be brave because someone else's courage has made bravery unnecessary. In Valhalla's great dining hall, the tables stretch beyond mortal sight, their surfaces carved from a single trunk of the world tree and polished smooth by centuries of use. But the feast spread here bears no resemblance to the warrior banquets of earthly mead halls. This is sustenance of an entirely different kind, nourishment for souls that have transcended the needs of flesh, food that satisfies hungers the living never recognize. The tables bear no meat, for the Ayn Herjar have eaten their fill of violence and desire no more. Instead, the feast consists of fruits that grow from memory itself, apples that taste of the first meal shared with a beloved, bread that holds the warmth of a mother's kitchen, wine that carries the laughter of friends gathered after long separation. Each Ayn Herjar finds before them exactly what their heart remembers as perfect nourishment, and the supply renews itself not through death and resurrection, but through the simple abundance of contentment shared. At the hall's high table, Odin sits not as the stern all-father of war, but as the gentlest of hosts. His ravens, Hugin and Munin, perch beside him not to report on battles, but to share the small beauties they have witnessed in their flights across the 9 worlds, a child learning to walk, an old man teaching songs to his grandchildren, a woman planting flowers on a grave not from duty but from love. The ravens speak in whispers, their voices carrying the soft pleasure of those who collect wonders instead of warnings. Odin's own cup holds not mead but the distilled essence of satisfaction, the feeling a warrior knows when they realize their fighting days are over and they have earned the right to rest. He sips slowly, savoring not the taste but the moment itself, the eternal present tense of having arrived at the place where all journeys end. His one remaining eye sees not the strategies of war but the patterns of peace, the intricate beauty of a world where courage has made courage unnecessary. Around the lesser tables, the Ayn Herjar share stories, But these are not boasts of battles won or enemies defeated. Instead, they tell of the moments that made their courage worthwhile. The child pulled from a burning hall, the village that slept safely because they stood watch, the peace treaty signed because their strength made negotiation possible. Their voices carry the quiet satisfaction of those who fought not for glory but for love, and who now have eternity to remember why love was worth the fighting. In one corner of the hall, a group of shield maidens from different centuries compare the techniques they learned for tending battlefield wounds. The conversation has the quality of prayer, each technique shared in gratitude for the lives it saved, each skill offered as a gift to comrades who might never need to use it. They speak of pressure points and healing herbs, of how to carry a wounded warrior without worsening injury, of the words that can keep someone conscious long enough to reach safety. Near them, a circle of berserkers shares the meditative practices they learned to manage their battle rage, the breathing techniques that helped them return to human gentleness when the fighting ended. Their voices, once raised only in war cries, now carry the soft cadence of teachers passing on wisdom too precious to lose. They speak of the moment after battle when fury fades, of the careful work of becoming human again, of the price paid for the strength to protect what they loved. The youngest Ayn, those who died in their first battles, sit with the oldest, learning not tactics but the art of letting go. The veterans teach them how to hold the memory of courage without the need to be courageous, how to honor their fallen enemies without carrying hatred, how to transform the weight of taking life into the lightness of having preserved life. These lessons take decades to learn, but in Valhalla time moves at the pace of understanding, and no one needs to rush toward wisdom they are not ready to receive. As the feast progresses, the conversation gradually fades to comfortable silence. The Ayn do not eat to fill hunger, they have no hunger left, but to participate in the ritual of gratitude, the shared acknowledgement that they have reached the place where sustenance becomes communion. They sit together in the golden light of the eternal evening, their presence to each other the only nourishment any of them need. When the feast ends, they do not rise with the urgency of those who have battles to prepare for or watches to keep. Instead, they linger, savoring the luxury of time without purpose, companionship without agenda. Some remain at the tables playing quiet games of skill and chance, their laughter soft as summer rain. Others drift away in small groups, walking the hall's countless corridors with no destination except the pleasure of walking together through a place where every step is safe. In the great practice yards of Valhalla, the Ayn still train each day, but their exercises serve no purpose beyond the joy of movement and the satisfaction of perfect skill. They have no enemies to prepare for, no weaknesses to shore up, no fears to overcome through repetition. Instead, their training has become a form of moving meditation, a celebration of bodies freed from the need to fight and minds released from the strategy of survival. The practice weapons they use are carved from woods that exist nowhere in Midgard, ash that remembers every song ever sung beneath its branches, oak that holds the strength of deep roots without the stubbornness of thick bark, pine that carries the scent of forests where no axe has ever fallen. These weapons have no edges, no points, no capacity for harm, yet their balance is perfect, their weight exactly right for the muscle memory of warriors who have transcended the need for war. In one ring, two sword masters from different centuries work through combinations they have perfected over ages of practice. Their movements flow like water, each cut and parry executed not to defeat an opponent, but to create something beautiful in partnership. They fence with the dedication of dancers rehearsing a beloved ballet, their concentration absolute, their purpose purely aesthetic. The steel rings against steel with musical precision, creating rhythms that exist for no one except the two warriors who make them. Their bout has no victor because it has no conflict, only the shared creation of perfect form, the joint pursuit of technique so refined it becomes art. When they pause to rest, they discuss not strategy or advantage, but the subtle differences between movements, the way a stance feels when performed with complete mindfulness, the meditation that comes from doing familiar things with fresh attention. Their conversation has the quality of poetry, technical language transformed into something approaching prayer. In another ring, a group of archers practice not accuracy they achieved that long ago, but the pure pleasure of drawing and releasing a bow. Their arrows are tipped with flowers instead of points, and they aim not at targets but at the joy of hitting them. Each shot is a prayer of gratitude for hands steady enough to be trusted, eyes clear enough to judge distance, muscles trained carefully enough to repeat perfection. The flowers bloom where they strike, turning the practice field into a garden that grows more beautiful with each display of skill. The archery has become a form of planting, each arrow carrying seeds of beauty rather than points of death. The Aynherjar compete not to see who shoots most accurately, but who can create the most pleasing patterns, whose arrows can work together to design mandalas of flowering vines across the practiced targets. Their archery celebrates not the power to kill from distance, but the precision required to nurture from afar, the skill of placing exactly what is needed exactly where it can do the most good. Near the edge of the yard, a trainer works with warriors newly arrived from Midgard, teaching them not new techniques but new purposes for old skills. She shows them how swordwork can become a moving prayer, how spear thrust can transform into dance, how the reflexes trained for battle can serve contemplation instead of violence. Her voice carries the patience of someone who has eternity to teach and students who have eternity to learn. Under her guidance, the new Aynherjar discover that their warrior training was always preparation for this, not for better killing, but for the discipline required to live well when killing becomes unnecessary. They learn to channel the focus that once kept them alive in battle into the attention that keeps them present in peace. Their muscles remember the movements, but their minds learn new meanings for familiar motions. The training ground includes apparatus unknown in mortal gyms, climbing walls that grow taller as skill increases, never quite reaching a summit that cannot be surpassed. Balance beams that shift and flow like living branches, requiring constant adaptation without ever threatening real danger. Sparring partners made from solidified air, opponents who respond to every attack with precisely the resistance needed to make each warrior better without ever fighting back. These training aids exist not to build strength or speed, the Aynherjar need neither, but to provide the satisfaction of continued growth, the pleasure of discovering new dimensions within familiar skills. They train not because they must, but because the training itself has become a form of worship, a way of honoring the bodies that served them so well in life and the skills that earned them their place in eternity's most exclusive hall. As evening falls over the practice yard, the Aynherjar do not retreat indoors but gather in circles to share what they have learned. They demonstrate techniques not for tactical advantage, but for the beauty of motion performed with absolute precision. They teach each other not better ways to fight, but deeper ways to appreciate the artistry hidden within warrior skills. Their practice ends not with exhaustion, but with the deep satisfaction of time well spent in the company of peers who understand the true meaning of strength. Deep within Valhalla lie chambers that exist nowhere else in the 9 worlds, halls devoted entirely to memory, where the experiences of mortal life are preserved not as regrets or boasts, but as treasures polished by distance and understanding. Here the Aynherjar come not to relive their battles, but to discover the meaning hidden within moments they were too busy surviving to fully understand. The memory halls hold the true wealth of Valhalla, the accumulated wisdom of lives lived with courage and purpose. The halls themselves are built from crystallized time, their walls transparent as water but strong as the foundations of mountains. Within these crystal surfaces, scenes from mortal life play like reflections in still ponds, not the great moments of victory and defeat that bards sing about, but the smaller, quieter instances that made each warrior's life unique. A mother's hand checking for fever, the scent of bread baking in a kitchen left behind, the sound of rain on a tent roof during the last peaceful night before battle. In the Hall of First Loves, Ayn Herjar tend the memories of hearts given and received before war taught them to guard their feelings. Here a Viking raider from the Orkney shores watches his 17-year-old self carving a comb from walrus ivory, each tooth shaped with the desperate precision of young hands trying to create something worthy of the girl who would receive it. The comb gleams in memory more perfectly than it ever could in life, and his fingers trace patterns in the air as if he still held the carving knife, still felt the trembling hope that she might think him skilled enough to court. Nearby, a shield maiden from the Danish islands tends the memory of her wedding night, not the passion but the gentleness that surprised her, the careful way her husband braided her hair before they slept, the whispered promises they made in the darkness between their bodies. She had expected marriage to be another form of battle, but discovered instead a different kind of strength, the courage to be vulnerable, the warrior skill of protecting without dominating. The memory holds no sadness for what was lost, only gratitude for what was experienced. The Hall of Children's Laughter preserves the voices of the young ones each warrior fought to protect. Here memories take on weight and substance. A daughter's giggle when tickled becomes visible as silver bubbles floating through the air. A son's concentration while learning to whittle manifests as golden threads weaving through the crystal walls. The Ayn Herjar do not watch these memories, they participate in them, feeling again the particular exhaustion that comes from teaching a child to fight without frightening them, the specific joy of seeing small hands master skills that might someday save their lives. In one alcove, a berserker from the Finnish forests tends the memory of the morning he taught his nephew to track deer through snow. The child's questions float through the air like visible words. Why do the tracks curve that way? How do you know the deer was limping? What makes the broken twig different from the bent one? The berserker answers not with his voice but with his presence, sharing through touch and gesture the accumulated knowledge of seasons spent learning to read the stories written by hoofprints and scat and disturbed leaves. The Hall of Last Conversations holds the final words exchanged before departing for battles from which there would be no return. But these memories contain no prophecy or foreboding, only the ordinary affection of people who loved each other and assumed they would meet again. A warrior's wife complaining about the price of barley, a mother reminding her son to keep his seeks sharp, a friend joking about the new scratch in his favorite shield. These mundane exchanges have become precious beyond measure, proof that love expresses itself most truly in the everyday attention people pay to each other's welfare. Here an axeman from the southern fjords preserves his father's final advice, delivered while sharpening the blade that would become his inheritance. The old man's hands moved with the rhythm of decades, stone against steel, each stroke removing exactly the right amount of metal to restore the perfect edge. But his words focused not on weapon craft but on something deeper, the importance of knowing when not to draw the axe, of remembering that its purpose was protection rather than aggression, of carrying strength with humility rather than threat. The Hall of Quiet Courage preserves moments when warriors chose mercy over vengeance, protection over glory, patience over immediate satisfaction. These memories glow with different light than battle scenes, softer, steadier, the illumination of choices made not from adrenaline but from deeply held principles. Here a Danish raider watches himself releasing prisoners who could have been sold as slaves, choosing instead to return them to families who would have no way to ransom them. The decision cost him profit but earned him something more valuable, the knowledge that his strength served justice rather than mere opportunity. In another crystal chamber, a Norwegian shield maiden tends the memory of the night she chose not to execute a rival who had tried to poison her. Instead, she had sat beside the woman's pallet while the antidote worked, holding her enemy's hand through the fever, whispering reassurance to someone who had tried to kill her, but who was, in the end, just another frightened human being. The memory holds no pride or self-congratulation, only the deep satisfaction of having chosen the harder path because it led toward healing rather than further harm. As the Ayn move through these halls, they do not experience nostalgia or regret. Instead, they discover the true stories of their lives, not the dramatic peaks and valleys that seemed so important while living, but the steady accumulation of small choices that revealed their character. They see themselves not as heroes or villains, but as human beings who did their best with imperfect knowledge, who chose courage when it mattered most, who earned their place in Valhalla not through spectacular deeds, but through the everyday decision to use their strength in service of what they loved. Beyond the Great Hall, where Valhalla's walls open onto terraces that overlook all 9 worlds, stretch gardens unlike any that grow in Midgard. Here the Ayn have planted not crops for sustenance or herbs for healing, but living memorials to every peaceful moment their courage helped preserve. These gardens grow from gratitude rather than soil, bloom with satisfaction rather than seasonal rain, and bear fruit that tastes of pure contentment. The garden of protected sleep holds flowers that bloom only in darkness, their petals the color of deep rest, their fragrance carrying the essence of every night when families slept safely because warriors stood watch. Here grow the midnight lilies, their stems tall and straight as spear shafts but soft as silk, their blooms opening to reveal centers that glow like banked coals in a peaceful hearth. The Ayn who tend these flowers move through the dark gardens with the same careful attention they once paid to night watches, but their vigilance now serves beauty rather than survival. Each lily represents a specific night of peaceful sleep, a child's rest undisturbed by nightmares because no raiders approached the settlement, a mother's deep slumber earned because her sons returned safely from the sea, an old man's final sleep allowed to come naturally because no sword cut it short. The Ayn water these flowers with collected dew from the branches of Yggdrasil, each drop carrying the accumulated peace of all 9 worlds. The lilies respond by growing taller and more luminous, their light visible from any point in Valhalla where someone needs reminder that their courage served a worthy purpose. In the Garden of Harvest Moons, the Ayn grow crops that will never be eaten, grain that exists purely to wave in the wind, fruit trees that blossom and bear just for the pleasure of abundance, herb gardens that release their fragrance as offerings to the evening air. The workers here move with the rhythms they learned in mortal life, but their labor serves contemplation rather than necessity. They plant in careful rows not because efficiency matters in eternity, but because the patterns please them, the geometry of well-tended soil satisfying something deeper than hunger. A woman who died defending her village during harvest season tends apple trees whose fruit hangs heavy and golden year-round. She learned in life that there is no greater satisfaction than seeing the results of patient work, and in Valhalla she has eternity to perfect the arts of pruning and grafting and soil preparation. Her apples exist as pure possibility. Each one could feed someone, but they need not, so they hang on the branches like prayers of abundance, like promises that there will always be enough for everyone. Beside her, a warrior from the northern forests plants pine saplings that will grow for centuries, their branches eventually forming living cathedrals where the Ayn can sit in contemplation. He learned in mortal life that the best protection comes from thinking generations ahead, and in Valhalla he applies that wisdom to creating beauty that will serve companions he has not yet met. His planting has the quality of prayer without petition, simply the joy of putting something good into the world without expecting any return, except the satisfaction of having done it well. The Garden of Children's Games preserves the playing fields where young ones learn the skills that might someday save their lives, but here the games exist purely for joy. Wooden swords hang from tree branches, their edges worn smooth by generations of small hands, their balance perfect for teaching without threatening. Practice targets stand ready for young archers who exist now only in memory, but the targets remain maintained and freshly painted, because someone who loved those children still tends their training ground with the devotion of a parent who hopes they might return to play. In one corner of this garden grows a hedge maze designed not to confuse or challenge, but to provide the simple pleasure of wandering paths that lead somewhere interesting regardless of which turns you choose. The hedges themselves are grown from the memory of every game of hide-and-seek ever played by children whose parents slept peacefully because warriors kept watch. The paths wind through alcoves where toys carved from driftwood wait on stone benches, available for any Aynh who wants to remember the weight of a wooden horse in their hands, the satisfaction of carving something simple and good. The garden of wedding feasts grows flowers that bloom in pairs, roses that intertwine their stems, daisies that lean toward each other across the garden paths, morning glories that climb the same trellises in spirals that mirror each other's curves. These flowers represent every marriage that survived because warriors made the world safe enough for love to flourish. Every couple that grew old together because young men and women chose to stand between violence and vulnerability. Here the Aynh who died unmarried tend the gardens of love they protected but never experienced themselves. Their work has no bitterness, only the deep satisfaction of having made possible joys they valued even though they could not share them. They plant and water and prune with the careful attention of those who understand that love requires protection, that romance flowers best in soil made secure by sacrifice, that the greatest warriors are often those who fight not for glory, but so others can experience the gentleness that makes life worth living. As evening settles over all the gardens, the Aynh do not retreat indoors but remain among the growing things they tend. They sit on stone benches worn smooth by centuries of use, listening to the sound of wind through leaves that will never fall, breathing air perfumed by flowers that bloom for no purpose except beauty. Their gardening has become a form of worship, not worship of gods who demand sacrifice, but worship of the simple goodness that makes existence meaningful, the accumulated small beauties that justify the cost of protecting them. In the quietest wing of Valhalla stands a hall that the Aynh approach with special reverence, the Hall of Small Warriors, where rest those who died defending others before they had time to grow into their full strength. These are the children who stood between danger and someone even more vulnerable, the young ones who discovered courage before they learned fear, who earned their place in the Hall of the Slain not through years of battle, but through single moments of perfect bravery. The hall itself is built to their scale, doorways sized for small hands to reach the latches, windows positioned so young eyes can easily see out into the gardens beyond, furniture carved with the whimsical touches that please children even in eternity. The walls are painted not with scenes of war but with the stories and songs these small warriors loved in life, trees that walk and talk, animals that wear clothes and solve problems with cleverness rather than strength, adventures where the smallest heroes prove that size matters less than heart. Here rests Astrid, barely 8 winters old when raiders attacked her village. She died trying to warn the outlying farms, running from house to house with her small legs pumping until an arrow found her back. In Valhalla, she no longer runs with desperate urgency but with the pure joy of a child who loves the feeling of wind in her hair. She has grown not older but more herself, her courage refined to its essence, her generosity freed from the limitations of mortal circumstance. She tends a garden of flowers that change color with the seasons of her mood, and she speaks to them in the sing-song voice children use when playing alone. But her words carry the authority of someone who proved that bravery has nothing to do with size, and the flowers bloom more brilliantly when she tells them stories of the other small warriors she has met since arriving in the hall. Her presence reminds the Aynherjar that heroism often wears ordinary faces and chooses the most unexpected moments to reveal itself. Near her, young Bjorn plays with wooden ships he carves from driftwood gathered on the shores of eternity. He died at 12, fighting beside his father when their fishing village was attacked from the sea. His small seeks could barely pierce leather armor, but he stood his ground until the last villager reached safety in the forest beyond the harbor. In Valhalla, he has all the time he never had in life to perfect his wood carving, to learn the patience his young hands never quite mastered when urgency drove every moment. His ships are perfect miniatures of the vessels he watched in the harbor throughout his brief life, but he carves them not for war but for exploration. Each tiny craft holds crew figures no bigger than hazelnuts, and he invents adventures for them that involve discovery rather than conquest, islands where friendly giants share their orchards, underwater kingdoms where merfolk teach swimming to land dwellers who fall overboard, storms that carry ships not to shipwreck, but to unexpected shores where new friendships await. In one corner of the hall, a group of the smallest warriors plays games that would have been impossible in mortal life. They organize elaborate tea parties for ravens who speak only in poetry, stage theatrical productions where they play all the roles themselves, build castles from blocks that float in the air, and hold their positions through pure architectural optimism. Their laughter has the quality of wind chimes, musical and light, carrying no burden, except the simple joy of being able to play forever in perfect safety. These children died protecting others, younger siblings, injured adults, animals too frightened to flee, but in Valhalla they need protect nothing except their own right to remain children for as long as they choose. Some have been in the hall for centuries, the games growing more elaborate and imaginative with each passing age, their friendship networks expanding to include young warriors from every culture and era that knew how to honor courage in the small. The adult Aynherjar visit this hall not as supervisors but as students, learning from these small warriors the art of finding joy in simple things, the skill of creating wonder from materials no more exotic than imagination and time. The children teach them games that exist nowhere else, contests where the goal is not winning but making everyone laugh, puzzles that solve themselves when approached with sufficient silliness, stories that grow more interesting each time they are retold because each listener adds new details. In return, the adult warriors share their own skills scaled down to child size, sword techniques adapted for wooden practice blades, tactical knowledge transformed into elaborate games of capture the flag, survival skills taught through scavenger hunts that turn the vast halls of Valhalla into playgrounds where everything dangerous has been replaced with everything delightful. The children also serve as Valhalla's memory keepers for a particular kind of heroism, the bravery of those who act not from training or experience, but from pure instinct to protect what they love. They remind the adult Aynherjar that courage is not learned but revealed, that the capacity for heroism lives in every human heart regardless of age or size or preparation. Their presence in Valhalla proves that the hall accepts not just those who dedicated their lives to war, but anyone who chose to risk their life for others, even if they had barely begun to live. As evening settles over the hall of small warriors, the children gather for the ritual they invented themselves, the telling of bedtime stories to the adult Aynherjar. They take turns spinning tales of adventure and wonder, their young voices weaving narratives that remind their listeners of the world outside Valhalla, the living realm their courage helped preserve. The stories always end happily because these children have earned the right to believe in happy endings, and their faith in goodness, renewed daily, serves as medicine for warrior hearts, that sometimes grow heavy with the memory of what they had to do to protect what they loved. As the eternal evening settles over Valhalla, the Aynherjar gather in the hall's highest tower to observe the ritual that gives meaning to their rest, the watching of Midgard, the careful attention paid to the world their courage helped preserve. From these windows they can see across all 9 realms, but their eyes focus most often on the human world, where mortal lives unfold in patterns both familiar and constantly surprising. The tower room is arranged like a scholar's observatory, with instruments that measure not celestial movements, but the subtle changes in human hearts. Here the Aynherjar track the slow progress of peace across regions once torn by war, the gradual healing of communities that learn to resolve conflicts without bloodshed, the patient growth of trust between peoples who once knew only fear of each other. Odin himself maintains the greatest of these instruments, a mirror made from the surface of the well of Erd, polished to perfect clarity by the Norns themselves. In its depths he can see the consequences of every act of courage ever performed, the ripples that spread from each moment when someone chose to protect rather than exploit, to heal rather than harm, to build rather than destroy. The mirror shows him that no act of bravery, however small, ever truly ends, that courage breeds courage across generations, that the willingness to sacrifice for others creates a legacy that outlasts empires. Through the mirror, the Aynherjar watch children playing games that would have been impossible in ages of constant warfare, elaborate competitions where the goal is collective problem-solving rather than individual victory, theatrical performances where former enemies' descendants work together to tell stories of reconciliation, festivals where different communities share food and music without fear of betrayal or attack. They see farmers planting crops in fields that once ran red with battle blood, confident that they will live to harvest what they sow. They watch merchants traveling roads that once belonged to bandits and raiders, their wagons heavy with goods traded fairly between peoples who have learned that prosperity shared benefits everyone more than wealth hoarded by the strong. They observe councils where disputes are settled through discussion rather than single combat, where the strength of arguments matters more than the strength of the sword arms that support them. But the Aynherjar do not watch as idle observers. Their attention itself serves a purpose, their approval and blessing flowing across the barriers between worlds to strengthen the courage of those still living. When a young woman chooses to step between a bully and his victim, she feels the encouragement of every shield maiden who made similar choices. When a farmer shares his surplus with neighbors whose crops failed, he is supported by the invisible presence of every warrior who fought to protect the right of communities to help each other. The watching has become a form of prayer without petition, simply the focused attention of those who understand the true value of peace, who remember what it cost to achieve, and who dedicate their eternal rest to ensuring it does not slip away through carelessness or indifference. The Aynherjar serve as guarantors of mortal courage, their own bravery providing a foundation upon which living heroes can build new acts of protection and sacrifice. In one corner of the tower, a group of the youngest Aynherjar maintains a special vigil, watching over the children of Midgard, offering protection that operates through inspiration rather than intervention. They cannot prevent all harm from reaching the innocent, but they can ensure that whenever a child needs courage, the memory of every small warrior who ever stood against danger provides strength. Their watching creates a web of connection between past and present bravery, a network of support that spans the gap between the living and the dead. In Valhalla's sleeping chambers, though sleep here means something different than the rest known to mortals, the Aynherjar experience dreams that blend memory with vision, past with future, the world they knew with the world they helped create. These are not the chaotic dreams of mortal sleep, but carefully crafted experiences that serve as both healing and teaching, helping each warrior understand the full meaning of their earthly choices. The beds themselves are carved from living wood that continues to grow even as it supports the dreamers. The grain of the timber tells stories, rings that mark not years of drought and plenty, but seasons of war and peace, each circle containing the memory of lives saved and lives lost. As the Ayn rest, their dreams are shaped by these wooden witnesses, their unconscious minds guided by the accumulated wisdom of forests that stood through centuries of human struggle. Astrid, the young shield maiden from the Norwegian coast, dreams of the village she saved through her sacrifice. But in her visions she sees not her death but its aftermath, the children who grew to adulthood because she warned their families in time, the grandchildren those children bore, the traditions and stories that survived because the community lived to pass them down. Her dream shows her the wedding feast of a girl who was only 3 when the raiders came, now a grandmother teaching her own granddaughter to weave. The pattern in the cloth carries a motif that honors fallen defenders, and as the child's small fingers learn the complex interlace, she carries forward the memory of courage without carrying forward its burden. In another chamber, Thorbjorn the Quiet dreams of the battle where he earned his place in Valhalla, not the violence itself, but the moment afterward when he chose to tend the wounded on both sides, using his healer's knowledge to bind the wounds of enemies as carefully as those of comrades. In his vision, he sees one of those enemies, a young Saxon he pulled back from death's threshold, returning home to become a teacher, using the gentleness he learned from suffering to guide children away from the path of revenge. The dream follows the ripples of that one act of mercy through generations, showing how compassion shared in the darkest moment can become a light that guides hundreds toward better choices. The dreams serve multiple purposes beyond healing. They are also preparation for the work that awaits after Ragnarök, when the Ayn will trade their role as protectors for their destiny as teachers. In sleep, they practice the arts they will need in the new world, not the skills of war, but the deeper abilities of guidance, wisdom sharing, and the delicate craft of helping others discover their own courage, without having to face the trials that forged the Ayn strength. Bjorn Ironside dreams not of his famous raids, but of a conversation he once had with a young thrall, a Celtic boy captured in one of his expeditions. In the dream, the boy asks him why warriors fight, and Bjorn hears himself giving an answer he never spoke in life but understands now, that the best warriors are those who fight to make fighting unnecessary, that true strength serves not itself but the weakness that needs protection, that the only victory worth winning is the one that makes all future battles pointless. The boy in the dream grows up to become a lawgiver, using the harsh lessons learned in captivity to create codes that protect the vulnerable rather than privilege the strong. His laws spread across Ireland and beyond, and in his vision Bjorn sees how the pain he caused in capturing the boy was transformed into wisdom that prevented countless similar sufferings. The dream does not excuse his actions, but shows him how even his failures served purposes he could not have imagined, how the pattern of existence weaves meaning from the strangest materials. In the dreams of the Ayn, time moves differently. Past and future blend until they become facets of an eternal present where every action reveals its ultimate consequence, where every choice displays its hidden meaning. The warriors see not only what their courage accomplished, but what their failures taught, not only whom they saved, but who was saved by those they saved. The dreams become a vast web of cause and effect where nothing is wasted, where even pain serves purposes too large for mortal comprehension. Ragnhild the far-traveled dreams of roads, not the ones she walked in life, but the ones that exist now because she walked those earlier paths. In her vision, she sees peaceful trade routes where her generation knew only war trails, merchant caravans traveling safely along highways that were once too dangerous for any but the most desperate or the most heavily armed. She watches families making pilgrimages to sacred sites, their children laughing as they walk paths where her boots once left bloody prints. The road itself remembers her passage, but not the violence. Instead, it holds the memory of her determination to reach safety, her refusal to abandon wounded companions, her choice to share her last water with enemies too weak to fight. The dreams also serve as communication between the Ayn and the Norns, those ancient weavers of fate who see all patterns from beginning to end. In sleep, the warriors can perceive portions of the vast tapestry these sisters weave, understanding how their individual threads contribute to designs too complex for any single perspective to grasp. They see that their deaths were not endings but transitions, that their arrival in Valhalla was not retirement from service, but preparation for greater service. Through these night visions, they learn that Ragnarok itself is not cataclysm but metamorphosis, the moment when the old patterns of violence and domination finally exhaust themselves, when the need for warriors transforms into the need for teachers, when protection gives way to guidance, when the strong learn to serve rather than rule. In their dreams they practice for this role, learning patience deeper than any they needed in battle, wisdom more complex than any strategy of war. As morning light filters through Valhalla's windows, light that carries the accumulated hope of all 9 worlds, the Ayn wake not with the jarring transition of mortal sleep, but with the gentle emergence of those who have been traveling through realms of meaning. They carry their dreams into waking consciousness, and these visions become part of their preparation, part of their understanding, part of their readiness for the day when dreaming and waking will merge into a single state of enlightened service. In the great assembly hall of Valhalla, beneath a dome painted with the history of every successful negotiation, every treaty that held, every moment when enemies chose to become friends, the Ayn gather for councils unlike any held in the mortal world. These are not war councils where strategies of conquest are planned, but peace councils where the arts of reconciliation are perfected, where warriors learn to fight battles that end with handshakes rather than graves. The hall itself is designed to encourage wisdom rather than dominance. No throne rises above the others. Instead, seats are arranged in concentric circles that allow every voice to carry equally to every ear. The acoustics are perfect, engineered by dwarven craftsmen who understood that true leadership means helping others find their own voices rather than amplifying one's own. At the center of the circles sits not a ruler, but a simple table made from wood of the world tree, its surface polished smooth by countless agreements, its grain holding the memory of every oath sworn in good faith. Here Odin presides not as the All-Father who commands, but as the first among equals who facilitates. His role has transformed completely from his days as the god of war. Now he serves as master of discourse, keeper of wisdom, the one who knows when to speak and when to listen, when to challenge and when to affirm. His ravens no longer bring him reports of battles, but news of conflicts resolved through words rather than weapons, problems solved through patience rather than force. On this particular evening, the council addresses a dilemma that reaches them through the mirror windows. A dispute between 2 communities in Midgard that has lasted for generations, each side nursing grievances that predate the memory of anyone living. The violence has not yet begun, but the Ayn can see it approaching like a storm on the horizon, young men sharpening weapons, old men telling stories that emphasize injuries rather than healing, leaders on both sides preparing for war, because they cannot imagine any other path to resolution. The discussion begins with Sigurd the Dragon Slayer, though in Valhalla he is known more for the wisdom he gained from understanding dragons than for the violence of their killing. He speaks of a technique he learned in the memory halls, the practice of speaking not from anger but from the wound beneath anger, not from pride but from the fear beneath pride. When communities have feuded for generations, he says, his voice carrying the authority of experience, the real conflict is not over land or honor, but over the need to feel heard, to feel safe, to feel that their losses were not meaningless. Brunhild responds with insights drawn from her new role as tender of healing fires. In my experience, she offers, the flames that burn longest are those fed by old grief, but grief shared becomes lighter, and grief acknowledged can transform into something else entirely. She proposes a ritual for the feuding communities, not a battle to determine winner and loser, but a ceremony where each side tells the story of their losses while the other listens without interruption, where pain is witnessed rather than answered, where the goal is understanding rather than victory. The discussion continues through the night, with Aynh from different eras and cultures contributing wisdom drawn from their unique experiences. A Roman centurion shares techniques for building trust between former enemies. A Celtic druid speaks of rituals that help communities release the need for vengeance. A Saxon thane describes the patient work of rebuilding relationships destroyed by violence. Each contribution builds upon the others, creating a tapestry of approaches that addresses not just the immediate conflict, but the underlying patterns that generate such disputes. What emerges from their council is not a single solution, but a toolkit of possibilities, different approaches that might work depending on the specific circumstances, the personalities involved, the depth of the grievances, the readiness of the communities to consider alternatives to violence. They understand that peacemaking is an art, not a formula, and that each situation requires its own unique combination of wisdom, timing, and skill. But the Aynh do not stop at planning. Through methods known only to those who dwell between worlds, they begin to influence the situation from their hall in Asgard. Their combined attention serves as a beacon that strengthens peacemakers in Midgard, inspiring a young woman in one community to suggest that the ancient boundary dispute might be resolved through marriage rather than war, encouraging an elder in the other community to remember a time when the two groups helped each other through a harsh winter, giving courage to voices that speak for reconciliation rather than revenge. The influence operates through inspiration rather than compulsion. The Aynh cannot force mortals to choose peace, but they can make peaceful choices feel more possible, more appealing, more supported by forces larger than immediate anger or fear. They work like gardeners of human nature, tending the conditions that allow wisdom to grow, patience to flourish, and understanding to take root in soil that might otherwise nourish only bitterness. As the council concludes, the Aynh do not disperse but remain together, maintaining their collective focus on the situation they have addressed. They understand that peacemaking is not a single act but a sustained process, that conflicts as deep as the one they are addressing require not just good solutions but ongoing support for those solutions to succeed. Their vigil becomes a form of prayer, not petition but participation, not request but reinforcement of the choices that serve healing rather than harm. This is how Valhalla serves the 9 worlds in the age before Ragnarok, not as a reservoir of warriors waiting for the final battle, but as a community of wisdom keepers whose understanding of conflict and courage has evolved beyond the need for violence. They have learned the hardest lesson war can teach, that the greatest victory is making war unnecessary, that the strongest warriors are those who find ways to resolve disputes without drawing swords, that true courage sometimes means laying down weapons rather than taking them up. In the councils of Valhalla, the Aynh practice for the role they will play after Ragnarok, when the old patterns of dominance and submission finally exhaust themselves, when the need for warriors transforms into the need for healers, when protection gives way to guidance, when the strong learn to use their strength in service of peace rather than in pursuit of victory. As seasons turn into years and years into centuries within Valhalla's timeless embrace, the Ayn witness something unprecedented in the history of the Nine Worlds, the gradual emergence of what the wise call the Long Peace, an era when communities begin to resolve their conflicts without bloodshed, when the skills of negotiation prove more valuable than the arts of war, when courage expresses itself through protection rather than conquest. From their watching towers, the Ayn observed the slow transformation of Midgard with something approaching awe. Villages that once lived in constant fear of raiders now send delegations to neighboring settlements, sharing knowledge of agriculture and craft. Trade routes that were once too dangerous for any but the most desperate merchants now carry families traveling simply to visit relatives, their wagons heavy with gifts rather than weapons. Young men who in earlier ages would have sought glory through violence, instead compete in contests of skill and creativity, earning renown through their ability to build rather than destroy. The change does not come suddenly or universally. There are still conflicts, still moments when communities resort to violence, still individuals who choose the sword over the speaking staff. But the overall pattern shifts like the slow turning of seasons, and the Ayn recognize in this transformation the fulfillment of their deepest hopes, the proof that their sacrifices served a purpose larger than any individual act of courage could encompass. In Valhalla's great library, scribes who were once warriors record these changes with the meticulous care of scholars documenting a miracle. They chronicle the first treaty between feuding clans that holds for more than a generation. They preserve the words of the first leader who chooses to feed his enemies' children during a famine rather than use their hunger as a weapon. They document the emergence of new institutions, councils where disputes are settled through discussion, schools where former enemies' children learn together, festivals where different peoples share their traditions without fear of theft or mockery. The Ayn understand that they are witnessing something their own era could barely imagine, a world learning to exist without the constant threat of violence, communities discovering that cooperation yields greater prosperity than competition, individuals finding that their deepest needs for recognition and respect can be met through contribution rather than conquest. It is the world their courage was meant to create, the peace their sacrifices were meant to purchase, the future their deaths helped make possible. But they also understand their role in sustaining this transformation. The long peace did not arise spontaneously from human nature. It emerged because warriors like themselves chose to die defending the vulnerable, protecting the weak, standing between violence and innocence until violence exhausted itself against their courage. Their sacrifices created space for different choices, time for wisdom to develop, examples that showed even the most aggressive hearts that there were forms of strength more satisfying than dominance. Through the mirror windows of their tower, they watch young people who have never known war learning arts that their own generation never had time to master. They see poets whose verses celebrate cooperation rather than conquest, craftsmen whose works serve beauty rather than intimidation, leaders whose authority comes from their ability to build consensus rather than their skill with weapons. These are the inheritors of the peace the Ayn bought with their blood, and their flourishing justifies every sacrifice made to protect them. In one particularly moving scene, they observe a festival where communities that were enemies within living memory gather to share food, music, and stories. Children who are the great-grandchildren of warriors who died fighting each other now play together with the unconscious intimacy of those who have never learned to see each other as threats. The Ayn watch these children with tears of joy, knowing that their own deaths helped create a world where such innocence is possible, where trust comes naturally because trust has been consistently protected. The long peace also transforms Valhalla itself. The hall that once served primarily as rest for weary warriors gradually becomes something else. A school where the arts of peace are perfected, a laboratory where solutions to human conflict are developed and tested, a sanctuary where wisdom accumulates like treasure and is shared freely with any world ready to receive it. The Ayn discover that their warrior skills translate perfectly to peacemaking. The patience learned in siege warfare serves negotiation. The tactical thinking developed in battle applies to solving problems of cooperation. The courage required for combat enables the taking of risks necessary for reconciliation. They begin to develop new forms of service that extend beyond the simple protection they once provided. Through dreams and inspiration, they guide mortal leaders towards solutions that serve all parties rather than just the strongest. Through their collective wisdom, they help communities develop institutions that prevent conflicts from escalating to violence. Through their example, they show that true strength means using power to protect rather than dominate, to heal rather than harm. As the long peace deepens and spreads, the Ayn sense the approach of the transformation the Norns have long foretold. Ragnarok draws nearer, but they no longer fear it because they understand what it truly represents. Not destruction but graduation, not ending but metamorphosis from one form of service to another. The need for warriors is ending because the world is learning to exist without creating the conditions that require warriors. Their success in protecting others has created a reality where protection is no longer the highest need. In quiet moments, gathered in their halls of memory and contemplation, the Ayn speak of what comes after. They know that when Ragnarok arrives, it will not bring the violent chaos that mortal prophecies describe, but the peaceful transformation of a cosmos that has finally learned the lessons their sacrifices were meant to teach. They will march from Valhalla not to fight a final battle, but to witness the end of the need for battles, and to see the completion of the work they began with their willingness to die for others. The long peace is not just an era but a promise. That courage invested in protecting others creates compound returns across generations. That every act of self-sacrifice plants seeds that may not flower for centuries, but will eventually bloom in ways the original planter never imagined. The Ayn rest in Valhalla with the deep satisfaction of gardeners, whose patient work has finally produced a harvest beyond their wildest dreams. A world where their children's children's children can grow up innocent of war, free to discover what human beings might become when their energy is devoted entirely to creation rather than survival. Tonight, as you prepare for your own rest, you join the Ayn in their vigil over the long peace they helped create. Your own choices to protect rather than exploit, to build rather than tear down, to choose difficult kindness over easy cruelty, contribute to this same great work. Every moment when you choose courage over comfort, service over selfishness, you add your thread to the tapestry they began weaving with their lives. Rest now in the knowledge that you are part of something larger than any individual life, a great collaboration across time that transforms the world one act of courage at a time, one choice to love rather than fear, one decision to stand up for what is right even when it costs more than you want to pay. In Valhalla, the feast never ends because there is always more to celebrate, always new victories of the heart to honor, always fresh proof that love, though it may work slowly, works surely and never fails to triumph in the end. Rest now in the hall of heroes, rest now in perfect peace.